Welcome in, everyone, to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Tuesday, August 20th around here, and we have a great show for you today. We're going to start talking a little bit about NIL. There have been a lot of people yelling from the rooftops about how bad NIL is. Well, I don't feel that way at all, so I want to break that down in the first segment. Then we'll get into lingering questions around the top teams. We did the top 4 yesterday. We'll finish out the top 10 today. Then we'll get into some of the questions around Texas, and the biggest one for me is their ability to close out those really close games. They struggled to do it last year, and definitely something that can come back to bite them this upcoming year. Then we'll get into fall camp intel. A ton of quarterbacks have been named the starter at their university. And then for a top 10 Tuesday, I'm going to do the 10 things that I love the most about college football. As we're about to get into the season, I feel like it's a good time to break that down for you guys. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have a fun back and forth here, is to use that little $ at the bottom of the chat. It has a super chat feature that you can leave any question, any comment that you'd like, and you can get it on the screen for the show. You can also use the GSMCpodcast.net page if that's a little bit easier for you, but sometimes it's just a little bit easier to go down to the bottom of the chat, find that $, and leave a little question or something. This is a great way for you all to get a little bit more interactive in the show, which is obviously what I want around here, and definitely helps us out as well, obviously. So definitely use that if you'd like to, but let's go ahead and jump in, and let's talk about NIL, and this has been a big topic of conversation, especially recently, with a couple of the big-time commitments that have happened around the country, and it's created a very, very interesting conversation, because really since NIL has been introduced, there's been a lot of people kind of bemoaning it, a lot of people, worried about what the future holds for this thing, and worried that everyone's just worrying about how much money that they can make, not, where's the best situation for me, where would I thrive the most, where would I do the best, and that's a real concern. I'm not here to tell you that those worries do not exist, because they absolutely do. But overall, I think when you talk about NIL, there's tons of pitfalls, there's tons of things that we can, that can go wrong, whether it's coaches lying to players about the amount of money that they're going to make, or players, prioritizing that a little bit too much in their recruitment and kind of getting themselves into a tough place. But overall, I think when you talk about this stuff, it really comes down to a couple of things, and it really comes down to the fact that it's been a very, very long time that these universities have been essentially working these guys for 80-hour weeks. You would be astounded by the amount of time they spend worrying about football, whether it's, study or film study or on the practice field in games. They put in incredible amounts of time, and for a very long time they were getting nothing for their pay. I understand they got a little bit of scholarship, but let's not act like that's remotely the same thing as what they should have been getting, which is likely some type of paycheck. Now, the issue with this is obviously the guidelines around NIL. It creates a very, very interesting world, and is definitely something that kind of creates more pitfalls than it possibly could. But overall, I mean, these players deserve the money. They're plain and simple. And one of the big examples lately has been Josh Petty. He committed to Georgia Tech last week, and it was rumored that he's making $800,000 in his throughout his time every single year at Georgia Tech. And yeah, that is crazy. I'm not here to tell you that it's not wild that an 18-year-old is going to be making $800,000 a year, but I'm also not going to tell you that he's not worth it. I'm also not going to tell you that this isn't something that probably should have been happening at least a couple of years ago in this sport. And the reality of all of the things that we hate about NIL, all of the things that we dislike about the way that it goes about business, a lot of it has to do with the fact that they were just behind on this. They were firmly behind on, getting this in place, because the reality is probably should have been done about 10 years ago, probably should have been talked about 15 years ago, but it had to be state governments getting into play, whether it was Florida or California, to force their hand, and now we live in a world with very little guidelines around it. So, yes, Josh Petty making $800,000 a year is a pretty wild thing. David Sanders, it said that he has a big-time NIL deal waiting for him at Tennessee. But also, it's not a problem. It is wild. It is a sign of the times. But at the end of the day, it's not a bad thing. It's the reality of this sport. These two players are seem to be at least, guys that can bring in a ton of money to your football program. And on top of that, you have other guys that are already in college, whether it's Quinn Ewers or Shedeur Sanders or Arch Manning or whoever, that are going to bring value into your program. Period. End of story. And for a long time, that value went straight to the head coach, went straight to the assistants, went to facilities, went to the AD, went to the boot. It went to people that, frankly, were not putting in the work that these players are. So I understand the worry. Don't get me wrong. I fully understand that there is some problems here, and I fully understand, and I'll actually get into some of Mike Gundy's comments here in a second and break down why he was entirely right about this situation. But you talk about NIL, there's so many great things that have come from it. There's so many beautiful examples of kids, using it the right way. We talked about Colin Simmons last week, has set up a foundation for kids in his area to help out with autism using the NIL money that he's made. Caleb Williams had a NIL deal with a company, and he said, give it all to the O-linemen because they deserve a little bit of this money as well. There are things that can be done to make this a really, really beautiful thing, a thing that can be utilized by all of these players in the right way. The problem is, as of right now, there's not guidelines to figure out how it's supposed to be utilized and how recruiting is supposed to work and how these kids are supposed to handle this money once they get it. And I understand there's, a little bit of a gray area of telling kids how to spend their money, but there isn't a gray area of informing them of the best way to go about business, of informing them of the best way to use that money and utilize it going forward. So it's not something that, runs out very quickly, and it's not something that gets in the way of your college football career, which is actually something I'll get into right now, because there was a very interesting conversation that happened this past week with Mike Gundy, where he was talking about kind of the pitfalls of NIL, or really, he was really just talking about where his mind is at as they head into this season and kind of the way that they're, getting ready for this upcoming year. And he had some very interesting comments, and I'm realizing now that I forgot to put Mike Gundy in here. But at the end of the day, he was talking about this upcoming year and where his mind's at and everything that's kind of coming up. And he had a very, very interesting quote that made some people mad for whatever reason. But at the end of the day, he said, the good news is the next 5 months we can just play football. There's no negotiating now. The portal's closed, the negotiations, history, now we're playing football. The business side of what we do now, we have to have those conversations with them. Tell your agent to quit calling us and asking for money. It's non-negotiable now. We'll start again in December. That's the right sentiment. Period. End of story. Because we talk about NIL, and I understand kids have to be focused on it and they have to worry about it as they head in, because the reality is football is one of those sports that it could end in a day and you never have that moment back. So I understand, focusing on that and that being a part of your recruitment, and I will never be someone that gets mad at the kid for weighing that pretty heavily when they're going into recruitment. But at the same time, your value is made on the football field. That's where you get the most of your NIL money, is playing really good football. And you can't do that if you're worrying about how much money you're going to make in September or how much money you're going to make in October. You're going to worry about it by playing really good football, and then when December rolls around, you can have that negotiation with your coach, with your athletic department, whatever that looks like. Because frankly, I'm not fully sure what it looks like, because again, the guidelines are all over the place. But overall, I think it's one of those things that everyone, gets so mad when coaches talk about NIL in a disparaging way. And they get so upset when coaches say, it's time to play football. It's time to not worry about negotiation and all of that type of thing, because they're millionaires and they have all the money in the world. So how can you get mad at the players for trying to get theirs? And I get that. I understand that that's an argument. But the reality is, Mike Gundy is doing what's best for the players. What's best for the players is them focusing on football. What's best for the players is making sure that their ducks are in a row for this season, because if they're not, that NIL money's not coming through, because you're not going to be a good enough player for any business, any company to really look at you that way. So that's the big thing here, where there is a time and place for NIL. There is a time when you are, as a recruit, to get in with the coaches and have that conversation. No doubt about that. There is a good time to do that. And before the season is when to do that. But when you lace up those cleats and when you get on that field, it's time to go play football. And frankly, it lends yourself to making more NIL money in the long run. Because if you play really good football, you're going to get NIL money. It's the same thing that's happened with Carson Beck, with Quinn Ewers, with a number of elite athletes in this sport. You're going to make money if you play really good football, period, end of story. So once it's time to get into fall camp and get into game day, make sure you're locked in on game day. Don't be worrying about NIL. But overall, we talk about NIL in so many different ways, and there's a number of different parties in this, and there's people that are firmly against it, say it's ruining the sport, say it's taking away amateurism, and it is. It absolutely has. Amateurism is not a thing in college football, but frankly, I would argue if there's a sport that's bringing in hundreds of millions of dollars every single year, amateurism shouldn't exist in that sport. But that's another conversation, I suppose. But overall, there's a number of people with a number of different opinions. There's the doomsday crowd that says it's ruining the sport. Then there's people that say they absolutely deserve every single penny, and that's all they should be worrying about. I fall somewhere in the middle, but overall, we just need to stop acting like it's this nightmare. We have to stop acting like it's going to kill the sport. What will kill the sport is if we keep buying into this idea that it's a nightmare, because then progress won't be made in it, and there won't be, rules put around it and guidelines that can really help this. So overall, I mean, NIL is a weird thing. There's no two ways about that. I am trying to catch up the same way that you guys are. But the idea of these kids that put in 80, 85 hours a week to make your football team better, not getting paid for their service, was ridiculous for a very long time. And the reality is the questions, the confusion, the chaos around NIL is not the kids' fault. It's not, the players' fault. It's the people that, made the decisions to put all of this in place. It's their fault for not getting it in place earlier. So I understand that some players are going to get paid out. Some players are going to commit to a team because of the NIL money they make. And yes, that has a number of pitfalls that they could get trapped up in. But at the end of the day, it's not like NIL is the disaster that everyone is making it out to be. It's not like those kids shouldn't be worrying about that money to a certain extent, because football can end in a hurry. So overall, I think we talk about NIL in so many different ways. There are a lot of people that are very disparaging of it, and I understand there are worries around it, and the system around it, frankly, right now is a mess. But I think if we figure out the system, if we figure out guidelines that make sense, if we prepare these kids for how to handle this money, and if we don't put them in situations where they can utilize it in the wrong way, this could be a really, really beautiful thing, a thing that could help these kids launch themselves into the NFL with a little bit more comfort than waiting for that NFL check to go through to feel good about their finances. So overall, I understand it's crazy that a high school recruit is being promised $800,000 a year. It's crazy to me as well, but I don't necessarily think that makes it a bad thing. So it's something that we'll obviously continue to talk about, and I'm sure we'll develop over this year. But let's take our first break here, and when we come back, we're going to get into some lingering questions around the top teams. We did the top 4 yesterday. We'll go through the rest of the top 10 today. So we'll break that down right after this, so stick with us.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows where 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about NIL and how it's really not the disaster that everyone's making it out to be, but it does need to be put in check quite a bit. So we'll definitely figure that out, hopefully over the next couple of years, and this can be a great thing in the sport going forward. But let's get into some lingering questions around the top teams in the country. We got into the top 4 yesterday if you want to go check that out, but we got into the top 10 today. And let's get into this real quick, and we'll start with Notre Dame, or not even the number 5 team in the country. I kind of put these a little bit out of order, but Notre Dame is a very interesting team this upcoming year, and if you've been following throughout their fall camp, even if you haven't, you might have heard that their offensive tackle situation is not so good as of right now, and this could be a problem in week 1. We might just figure out the answer to this question in week 1, which is essentially just, will this offensive tackle situation torpedo their season? It definitely could, and it's something that when you're going up against someone like Nick Scourton, you're going up against someone like Cassius Howell, you're going to have your P's and Q's about you. And right now, they are very confused about what they're going to do at that position. It started when Charles Dragusa, the presumptive starter at least, at left tackle, went down for the year. Definitely a huge blow to that team, but they've been rotating guys in ever since at both positions, at left tackle and right tackle. Emil Wagner started at right tackle. Now it sounds like it could be Sam Pendleton. Tosh Baker started at left tackle. Sounds like it might be freshman Anthony Knapp at this point. So they're all over the place, more than anything else. And that is a huge issue because Riley Leonard's walking into this team, and the way that they can elevate this offense is really the same reason that Will Howard can elevate Ohio State's offense. His legs are special. Riley Leonard has an ability that last year Sam Hartman just didn't have. And the problem with that is it doesn't necessarily matter if there's 2 edge rushers breathing down your neck every single play. So he can be as special as he wants with his legs. He's not getting out of the rap of 2 defensive ends. That's just never happening. So they got to make sure they figure this out. And frankly, if they don't figure out even by week 1, it could mean 1 loss on their schedule, and then they're walking a tightrope, and then they got another big game against Florida State down the road where they got to face Patrick Payton and Marvin Jones. So they are not in a situation where they can just ride it out with someone that fits the mold that, gets the job done. They need real players out there, and if they don't, they're going to miss out on the playoff this upcoming year. Moving on to Ole Miss, the biggest question I have is, do they have to be elite offensively every single week to win a national title? Because that was kind of the case last year, and not always were they fully elite every single week because it's incredibly hard to do. So that's the big question. Ole Miss has a huge opportunity this year to take another step forward, but the reality is they need to win games different ways. They need to win games 24-20, 21-17. They need to win some one ugly and win some where the defense is the one leading the way. That's what championship teams do, and the question is, for me more than anything, is, does Pete Golding have it in him? I think he's a fantastic defensive coordinator and has done a number of really incredible things, including win a national title in 2020. But if you remember that offense for Alabama, it was incredibly hard to stop. And I think that's the biggest thing here is he has the guys, he has the talent, and there's no doubt about that. But he had the talent in 2020 as well, and they still needed a remarkable performance pretty much every week from that offense to get it done. So that's the question. Can Ole Miss, take the foot off the gas pedal for a second on offense and this defense hold suit? And they're going to face some really good offensive teams in Georgia, LSU, and many others that are going to pose this problem. So if they're going to be a championship team, if they're going to walk into the playoff and do the things they want to do this year, it's going to fall on that defense's shoulders, and frankly, it's going to fall on Pete Golding's shoulders more than anyone else. Moving on to Alabama, the outside players is the question that I have, and mainly the wide receivers. The corners I'm a little bit worried about as well, no doubt about that. But I think when you talk about this team, they're going to be able to run the ball. There's no 2 questions about that. I think Justice Haynes, Jamarian Miller, obviously Jalen Milroe, they're going to be able to run the ball. I don't doubt that for 1 second. The thing is, you can't just run the ball. That's not going to be able to get it done. And frankly, last year, it barely got the job done because they were so special down the field. Are they going to be that same team? Because you lost your 2 biggest targets from a year ago in Isaiah Bond and Jermaine Burton. But it sounds like Jeremy Bernard, the transfer from Washington, is going to be the leader in that room. You also have Ryan Williams, Caleb Odom, that are freshmen that are going to play. Kendrick Law, Kobe Prentice, and Emmanuel Henderson all fill out that room. So tons of ability. There's no doubt about that. But not a ton of production, and that's kind of the question here. Obviously, Jeremy Bernard is the leading receiver of this group, and he didn't necessarily light the scoreboard on fire when he was at Washington, so it's definitely something to watch. They have to develop a little bit better on that wide receiver position if they're going to be a dangerous team outside of the run. Now, they can get plenty done with the run game this upcoming year, I think, but at the end of the day, you need guys on the outside that are going to make plays if you're going to want to compete in the SEC. So definitely something to watch there. And then at corner, you got Zabian Brown, a freshman on one side. You have Domani Jackson, the transfer from USC on the other. The depth pieces tend to be a little bit younger, so this is far from where they want that position to be. And overall, I think Bama has the ability to win those big games. They have the ability to get guys out on the edge, and they have tons of talent at that wide receiver and even at that cornerback position. Just not a lot of production, not a lot of proven guys. And the question is, will losing Isaiah Bond to Texas come back to bite you, where you need that play at the end of the day? You need someone to come up big, and Isaiah Bond came up big against Auburn and in the SEC title against Georgia. Do they have that this year? As of right now, I'm not sure that they do, but Jeremy Bernard could absolutely develop into that person, or maybe Kendrick Law does, who knows. But moving on to Penn State here, do they have enough weapons? Kind of the same conversation of Alabama, and it has the same position that I'm worried about, the wide receivers. This one might be a little bit more dire than Alabama, though. The question is, I think they have enough weapons. I really like the top three guys that they have. When you talk about the two running backs and Tyler Warren, the tight end, I think they're going to be really, really good. Those three guys, no doubt about it. The question is, that can't be enough, right? Andy Kotelnicki obviously funnels a lot of his offense through his tight end. So having a really good tight end room like they have is super important and definitely will be a big-time thing for them this year. But you need difference makers on the outside. There's no way you can go about this season and get to the playoff and possibly win a Big Ten title or even get there if you don't have guys on the outside that are going to make big-time plays. But I think they have some that can take a step forward. I think Caden Saunders needs to take a big-time step forward and just be more sure-handed. Be the guy that they can go to on a third down and make sure that he's going to make a catch. I think Trey Harris is the guy that is likely going to be your wide receiver one. He's the one that's kind of separating himself the most, and we'll actually talk about him a little bit later. Julian Fleming is the big question here because he transferred in from Ohio State, and as of right now, I don't even know if he's going to start this upcoming year. Liam Clifford seems to be the wide receiver 2 and right above him, so definitely going to be a big-time question. It sounds like Julian Fleming is taking on a little bit more of a leadership role, but at the end of the day, they brought him in there to catch passes, so definitely going to be a really interesting thing. So overall, none of these guys really jump off the page right now. I think Harrison Wallace is a really talented player and could develop into a really good number one option, but as of right now, I still have big-time questions, and if they don't figure it out pretty quickly, then it's going to be a big-time problem that keeps them out of where they want to be yet again this upcoming year. Over to Michigan, the question is this O-line really just reloading? Are they really the team that, they were a year ago? They lost the top 6 guys on the offensive line, not just the starting 5, but the guy that they, slotted in there at guard, tackle, wherever they kind of needed him. And that's going to be a big-time question mark. Now, they have guys that have played games. They have Miles Hinton is the big-time guy returning. He started different games, spots started here and there. Josh Preby transferred over from, I believe, Northwestern, if I'm not mistaken. Greg Crippen has been elevated on the roster up to that starting role. Giovanni Hadi is a very talented player that absolutely is going to make some plays, but mostly played on special teams in the past. So the question is, are they above doubt? Have they gotten beyond the point where if it's Michigan's O-line, I feel good about them? And frankly, they probably have. They have been absolutely ridiculous for a number of years now, and especially with Sharon Moore and everyone else that works with that O-line on that staff, I have a hard time thinking there's not at least going to be a top 15, top 20 unit in the country. Now, that could be the difference between what they had last year and a 9-3 season this year, because as you remember, that was kind of the calling card. When they needed 3 yards, they were going to get 3 yards because that offensive line was going to push you off the ball. If they push them off the ball 1 yard this year, that could be the difference between a couple of wins. So the question, I think they are reloading. I think they are at a point where they're just kind of reloading the clip, getting back to work at that offensive line position. But even if they take a little bit of a step back, it could lead to 3 losses against some really good teams throughout the year, and then you're finding yourself on the outside looking in of the playoffs. So they could be reloading, and it could, frankly, not matter at the end of the day. So that'll definitely be something that'll be really interesting to watch. And then the biggest question is, does Florida State still have that hangover from the disappointment of 2023? Because this is a real thing. There are a lot of teams that have had, things not go their way at the end of one season. They show up the next season, they just don't really look like themselves. They don't look like they're, have as much energy. They don't have as much, want, I suppose, going into that game, and that's a big time question. They kick off in about 4 days and a couple hours here, and they got to get ready pretty soon, and they're probably getting on a plane here pretty soon to go over to Ireland. But I think this is one of those things that it is a big time question, and I'm definitely asking that question as well. But I think it's a little bit overblown, mostly because you still have Patrick Payton in that room. You still have Shaheem Brown in that room. You still have Azariah Thomas in that room. You still have a number of guys that lived through that. You still have a number of guys that watch Alabama's name come across the board and not theirs. And that still lives with them. And I think on top of that, I think the head coach, Mike Norvell, is not a guy that's going to let his guys take their day off. He's not a guy that is going to let the intensity drop because he is a high-intensity guy. So I think overall there's definitely a reality where they walk into this season and it just looks weird. It looks like a team that, feels a little beaten down, feels a little bit, disrespected, and doesn't bring the same energy. But frankly, I would be a little bit surprised if that were to happen. I think they have the dudes on this roster. I think they have the coaches on this roster to make sure that they take last year, they take the disappointment, and especially what happened in the Orange Bowl, and use it as motivation and use it as a reason to say that's never going to happen again, and we're going to prove it from day one. So this is obviously going to be something to watch and definitely something that could hurt Florida State this upcoming year, but overall, I don't worry about it too much. I think Florida State is a team that has every bit of the intensity and energy that you want them to have, and I doubt that any disappointment from last year is going to leak over into this one, but it definitely could. Definitely a big-time question for them, and we'll continue doing these lingering questions probably at least throughout tomorrow, and then we'll see where we stand from there. But let's take our second break here, and when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about Texas. They had a little bit of a problem putting away teams a year ago, and especially in those one-score games. Are they going to be able to do that this year, or is it going to come back to bite them? Or are they going to go the opposite direction? So definitely something to break down, and we'll do it right after this, so stick with us.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just gave some of the lingering questions around the top 10 teams in the country. Definitely some big time ones that could really impact these teams even in week one, and we'll figure that out pretty soon here. But let's get into Texas and let's talk about those one-score games that they had a year ago, because they could really come back to bite them this year, and some of those games should not have been one-score games. So let's go ahead and jump into this and let's talk about it here for a second, because Texas is a team that's heading into this year with as much hype as pretty much anyone in the country. They last year they went to the playoff, won 12 games for the first time since 2009, walking into the SEC as the second favorite team to win it. So much hype is going into this season for Steve Sarkisian and the Texas Longhorns. The question is, have they taken that step forward again from the one-score games that they need to? Because you look at the history under Steve Sarkisian in these games, it's not necessarily the prettiest thing in the world. Year one, it was 2-5. They lost all but two of those games that year by one score. In year two, it was 2-5 again in those games, and they lost every game that they lost that year by one score. Last year it was 3-2, and again they lost every game by one score. So every game but two games during Steve Sarkisian's career that has been lost at Texas has been by one score. And frankly, is that a good thing or a bad thing is a very hard thing to figure out. Is that a reason for confidence because they're playing teams really close, a couple of plays here and there could make the difference, or are you not being able to close out games that you should be closing out? So let's get into the games that happened last year where they were a little bit better in that front, and let's kind of break this down here for a second. It started with Oklahoma, so it was quite a bit into the season before they had their first game. I believe this was game 6 of the season, so that Alabama game was won by 10, so this is the first one-score game that they had, and frankly, this one's relatively simple. What went wrong? Red zone efficiency was a big-time problem. They got stopped on the goal line. Quinn Ewers threw a pick at the 2-yard line. A number of problems in the red area that they needed to fix, and frankly, that's going to be another thing to watch for this team, and will likely impact this question a lot. Can they be better in the red zone? If they can, then likely a lot of these one-score games wouldn't have happened a year ago, and they'd be on, rolling into this year. So this is one you just got to finish those drives. You got to make sure that you can get in the end zone, and if you don't, then stuff like that's going to happen. Nick Anderson's going to make a catch with about 15 seconds left in the game and bury you. So definitely something to watch, and that one's a little bit more simple than the rest of them. Houston was another one. This was the one that Quinn Ewers went down in. So he went down somewhere in the third quarter. I think he got hurt a little bit earlier in the game. They tried to keep it going and couldn't, so Malik Murphy took over and led them to a win. And it was really close. They were up 21-0 in this game. Houston came all the way back. They barely won this game. And frankly, if you're watching, there was a spot that was questionable, and I'll leave it at that for the time being. But at the end of the day, Texas did get out with a win, and you can chalk this up to Quinn Ewers getting hurt. You can chalk this up to a number of things, but in reality, Steve Sarkisian took his foot off the gas pedal. They were up 21-0. They were absolutely rolling through this defense, and then he started running the ball way too much. He started, just trying to run clock and keep their lead, and while there is a time and place to do that, no doubt about that, you got to make sure you're in a rhythm. And that's kind of the big-time moniker throughout this entire thing is keeping your foot on the gas pedal is a problem for Texas, and if they can fix that problem this upcoming year, this can be one of the best, if not the best offense in the country. But if they're going to continue taking their foot off the gas pedal, then some of these teams are going to beat them, plain and simple. Over to Kansas State, this was the game, I believe, right after that Houston game, and it was Malik Murphy starting. So this one was a little bit different as well, but again, they were up by quite a bit in this game and let Kansas State back into it for the same exact reason that it happened at Houston. There is a thing about this team where they roll out in the first 15 plays. That scripted drive is absolutely beautiful because Steve Sarkisian is one of the best in the business at pulling that off, but right after that, you got to make sure you keep that rhythm. You got to make sure you keep the ball in Quinn Ewers' hands, or in this scenario, in Malik Murphy's hands, and allow this team to do what they do. So that's the big-time question. They escaped in overtime because of the defense making some big-time plays down the stretch, but definitely it was a big-time question mark and one that could have totally changed their season last year. TCU was a very weird one. That was one where Quinn Ewers threw a pick early in the game. Jordan Whittington went back and got a fumble for them. It was absolutely ridiculous. But at the end of the day, they were up 26-6 in this game. They ended up winning 29-26. So that can't happen. It was the exact same thing as the last two games we talked about now. They won all of these games. So hard for me to really get mad at them. But at the end of the day, these shouldn't have been one-score games. These should have been games they won by 14 or 21, kept rolling on with their season and didn't have to worry about them. They ended up having to worry about them. That's definitely something to watch. And then the Washington game is probably the most straightforward, if I'm being totally honest, and it was really just Michael Penix was on another planet. They did make their mistakes, no doubt about it, but Michael Penix did not miss a spot that entire game, and frankly, you would be hard-pressed to find a defense that was going to stop him that day. So this is one, it came down to the wire. You definitely had some missed opportunities, but overall, there were very few teams that were beating Michael Penix in Washington that day. So that one's a little bit less of a worry than the rest of them. But overall, it comes back to one thing. You have to be able to say, we're up 21-0, we're moving the ball, and yes, you don't want to, push the ball down the field and be super aggressive and throw picks and get yourself into precarious situations. But you also don't want to lose that rhythm. You also don't want to just sit down and say, well, let's just run the ball the next couple of drives, run some time off the clock, because then some teams get some momentum. They get some energy on that sideline, and that's the last thing you want to give an SEC team as they head into this year. So overall, for me, it's keep the ball in Quinn Ewers' hands this year. You already have a running back problem, which is definitely something to watch throughout this year. I don't think it's quite as big of a problem as some people are making it out to be, but that's another conversation. I think at the end of the day, this is a third-year starter. This is a guy that came back for a reason. This is a guy that understands your offense as well as anyone in that building but Steve Sarkisian. Keep the ball in his hands. Say that, we know that you're going to make all of the right decisions, and if you make a bad one, the defense will pick you up. So I think it's one of those things that, obviously, when you're up 21 points, you're going to change the way you go about business. You're going to, run the ball a little bit more. You're going to run the clock a little bit more. but you shouldn't lose the rhythm of the offense. You shouldn't lose the play calling rhythm where you're just running the ball, 4 times in a row, going 3 and out and moving on to the next drive. You should, sprinkle in some different things. Use a lot of the RPOs, use a lot of the screen passes that Steve Sarkisian loves so much, and have that rhythm in the offense while still being up 21, because then you can get up 28 and you can get up 35, and that's the big time thing here where you're walking into a conference that is not going to give you any inches. If you let them back in the game, they're going to stomp on your neck and win it. I promise you that. You're not going to walk into Fayetteville and let them come back from 20 points down and them not win the game. You're not going to walk into Kyle Field, allow them to get some momentum, and them not win the game. I can promise you that. Now, you could probably do it at TCU. You could probably do it at some of these other places, but once you get into those big-time environments, once those fans get involved, you're going to have a big-time problem on your hands. So that's the reality of this season. It comes down to Steve Sarkisian and him saying, I understand we're up 21 right now, but we're not going to stop throwing the ball. And you don't have to be very aggressive. You don't have to push the ball downfield like a madman, but you do have to keep the rhythm. You do have to keep the ball in Quinn Ewers' hands, your best player's hands, and make sure that this continues to roll. So that's the reality. The best offenses in the country and the best offenses throughout the last 10 years, they're not about, always being passing, always pushing the ball downfield, always doing that, but they also don't stop. The car doesn't change speeds, it shifts gears, and it continues to fly. That's the goal of this offense, is to not take your foot off the gas pedal, to make sure that you continue moving, you just shift gears a little bit, and you continue with that rhythm that you have in this offense. So there's a number of different things that are going to come into play this year in the SEC, and those atmospheres are going to be a huge part of that. So if Texas is up 21-0 on Texas A&M, let's say, I don't necessarily think that's going to happen, but let's just say that that's the case, and then in 2 drives later, Texas A&M is down by 7. That crowd is fully back into the game, and that is not something that Texas wants to deal with. So overall, Steve Sarkisian just got to be more aggressive. He's got to be the guy that goes out there and says, I trust my quarterback, I trust my players to make all of the plays that I need them to make, even when we're up 14, even when we're up 21, and even when there is an ability for that team to come back, you got to make sure you keep your foot on their neck. So overall, this is the big thing for Texas. They have the ability to win all of these games. There's not a team in the country that Texas can't get on the field with and beat on any given Saturday. The thing is, can they beat them when they are up a little bit and let them back in? Do they have the ability to close out those big-time games? Because the 2 best teams that I just talked about in this segment were Oklahoma and Washington. They weren't able to win those games. So you have to make sure that in those big-time games, against those big-time teams, when it gets a little tight late in the game, you have the closing skills to win those games. And it's really a Steve Sarkisian thing more than anything else. It's about, keeping that foot on the gas pedal. They talk about all gas, no brakes over at Texas. That hasn't been the case over the last couple of years when it comes to play calling. They got to fix that this year. And if they don't, then there's going to be a number of SEC teams that are able to take advantage of this and give some wins or give some losses to Texas where they got wins a year ago. So this will definitely be something to watch. If they can limit 1-score games even more, that's obviously what you want. Go down from 5 to 3 this upcoming year. That would be a big time thing. But overall, it could be a huge problem. That could be the difference in Texas season this upcoming year. But let's take our third break here. And when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about fall camp. There is so much stuff going on, and a number of quarterbacks have just been named the starter on their team. So we'll get into that right after this. So stick with us.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about Texas and some of their issues in some one-score games and especially allowing teams back into those games. So, it's definitely something that could come back to bite them this upcoming year and something to watch as they walk into the SEC. But let's get into fall camp intel. Let's break down some of the different headlines from around the country. And there were a number of quarterbacks that were named their starter. But let's start in Florida State and let's break down this team that is kicking off in about 4 hours and 4 hours, in 4 days and a couple hours over in Ireland. They're probably getting on a plane right about now. But as of right now, throughout fall camp, DJ was DJ. He was roughly what you've seen the last couple of years, someone that has a really high ceiling, but then some days it just looks really out of sync. It looks very confusing, is missing spots, and that could be a problem this upcoming year because he's going to have to be more consistent this year if they want to do what they are capable of doing. But at the end of the day, you do have some weapons to throw to in that offense. Malik Benson is leading the way for the wide receivers, but Kyle Morlock is the guy to watch at tight end. He has made a ton of waves this last couple of weeks and is definitely someone that frankly could be one of their leading reception guys this year because DJ loves his tight ends, that is for sure. Jaylen Brown's also another guy to watch, a very talented young player at wide receiver that is going to make plays this upcoming year. Cam Davis made some waves at running back, and frankly, all the running backs made waves along with that O-line. So that is likely going to be the identity of this team, a lot of running the ball and then let DJ pick his moments here and there. On the defensive side of the ball, they are dominant. They're going to be really, really good. One of the best defenses in the country. Patrick Payton is an outright problem. Shaheem Brown, frankly, I think could be an All-American at the end of the year. And Azariah Thomas took another step forward, and he was a darn good player last year. So it's definitely a defense that is replacing a lot of guys, but it seems like they are right where they want to be. And everything seems ready to roll. You know, DJ is definitely still a worry as you get into this season, but overall this team looks ready to roll, and they're going to have to be in about 4 days when they face off against Georgia Tech. But moving on to their rival Florida, Jacoby Jackson continues to make waves throughout fall camp, and with Montrell Johnson down, it kind of gave him a little bit more of ability to step into a bigger part of this offense, and Montrell Johnson still very much has to be healthy, no doubt about that, and frankly I think he will be for week 1, but if he's not, you know you got a good option right here, and you got Trayon Webb right behind him. So you got to feel pretty good if you're Florida. Now, Montrell Johnson's got to be on the field against Miami, and I think he will, but it definitely gives you a little bit of peace of mind, hypothetically, if he was not. And overall, this Florida team has been operating with the confidence that a team that their coach could be fired at the end of the year just shouldn't be. Plain and simple. There are a couple of teams that over the last couple of years has walked in with a coach that you're very much questioning about. It's not very often that they walk in with this much confidence, with this much ability, and with the talent on the roster that they have. So I'm not saying Florida is going to, jump out and, make the playoff or anything crazy, but everyone's pointing at that schedule saying they're going to go 4-8, 5-7, and he's going to be fired by October. I wouldn't be so sure of that, but we'll find out in week 1, and we're going to talk about the team that they're going to be facing off against right here. Miami is a very interesting team, and the guy that's been making the most waves throughout fall camp is Elijah Arroyo. He made some waves last year, but got injured early on in the year, and he's right back to doing that this fall camp. So he's going to be a huge piece of their offense. The tight ends in general, I think, are really, really strong. They got 2 Elijahs, actually, Elijah Arroyo and Elijah Lofton, a very talented freshman that I think both are going to be problems for any defense that they face, and definitely gives Cam Ward a really, safe, good option at that tight end position. Chris Johnson Jr. is the guy I want to talk to you about, and yes, that Chris Johnson, and yes, he can run like his father. He has absolutely world-class speed. I believe he runs a 10-200, so absolutely ridiculous, and he's someone that is definitely going to make plays for them this fall, whether it's in the return game or as a change of pace back. This guy is going to get on the field, and he's going to be hard to stop when he gets his feet rolling. So definitely someone to watch this upcoming year, and someone that could really burst on the scene in a lot of different ways. On the back end of that defense, they've had a couple of really big players show out. Mychal Powell came in from Washington. Sounds like he's leading the way both on the field and off the field as a leader. Has kind of taken that role very seriously, and it's something that they need him to do. Other guy is Markeith Williams. He's making every single play in fall camp, and it's something that they very much need. With Cameron Kitchens and James Williams walking out the door, you need some safeties to step up, and it sounds like Markeith Williams is going to be that guy. Over to Penn State, we said we would talk about these wide receivers a little bit later. Well, it sounds like Trey Wallace and Liam Clifford are leading the way at those wide receiver positions, the 1 and 2. Insane that Julian Fleming was going to come in as the wide receiver 1 and didn't. Actually, there are some people over at Penn State that have said Harrison Wallace was going to be the 1 regardless, but Julian Fleming was going to start. I can almost promise you that, and he is not anymore. So definitely going to be an interesting thing. He is kind of becoming a leader, which could be a very helpful thing for this team, as he's played a lot more football than a number of guys in that room. So definitely will be something to watch, and if Julian Fleming can come off the bench and make some plays, then maybe this wide receiver position is a little bit better off than I thought. But it sounds like the defense and the offense are kind of playing to a stalemate, which is actually pretty good news, because I do think this defense is going to be really good, and you do have some questions about the offense. So if they're trading punches right now, you got to feel pretty good if you're a Penn State fan, and it sounds like the cornerback group is going to be maybe even better than last year, even with all of the people leaving. It sounds like A.J. Harris is playing really well. Cam Miller, the guy on your screen right there, number 5, is a very talented kid, definitely going to make some plays. Davion Collins and Jalen Kimber are both guys that are going to get plenty of run at that position. So they lost some big-time dudes. They lost Kalen King, they lost Johnny Dixon, they lost Daquan Hardy, but they still have some dudes in that room, and definitely is going to be a really solid unit. The O-line is the big-time question here. They have some really good players. Drew Shelton is taking over for Olu Fashanu, which is a big-time question mark at that left tackle position. But overall, it looks like they're still kind of rotating things. They're still trying to figure out what the right 5 is, and I tend to think that they're going to figure out, and they have a little bit of runway to figure it out. But frankly, that West Virginia game could be a bigger problem than they want it to be if that O-line is not, at least sort of figured out before that Week 1 matchup. Moving on to Michigan, the biggest thing here is it sounds like this defense is going to be quote-unquote positionless. It sounds like they are just going to have all the dynamic athletes, the best 11 on the field at any given moment, and they have a lot of really good 11. There is no doubt about that. They are going to be as dangerous of a team as there is in the country, and with Wink Martindale at the controls, I fully understand why positionless football is the way they want to go about business. Alex Orji just continues to take this team by storm, continues to take the reins as the quarterback 1, and he's going to be the guy. It sounds like he's making more and more consistent passes, and if that comes along quickly, then things get really interesting. I'm kind of viewing him kind of as a almost Jalen Milroe type player, a very different style, but in the terms of, I think it's going to take him a couple of weeks to really get rolling, but this is a very talented kid, and if they can call the offense in accordance to what he wants to do, he's going to be able to make plenty of plays. I can promise you that. So maybe it's like Jalen Milroe exactly, and it's a really ugly game against Texas. He gets benched and then makes his way back on the field. But at the end of the day, I do think he's making some big-time strides and absolutely will be a huge player for them this upcoming year at quarterback. And then moving on to wide receiver, they need young guys to step up. It sounds like Channing Goodwin is one of the guys to watch there. He's a very talented freshman wide receiver, and they got 2 of them. Amarian Stewart is another guy to watch there, but overall, I think both those guys are likely going to get on the field because they probably got to get on the field. If they are that talented and if they can really go with the ball in their hands, then you're going to have to make sure that they're on the field, and Alex Orji has a number of other targets to go to, and definitely something to watch in that front. But moving on to Oklahoma, I definitely had some questions about this defensive line as we got into the year. It sounds like they feel pretty good about it. It sounds like the front line with Dominic Williams and Dejon Terry is doing exactly what you want them to do. It sounds like Jaden Jackson and David Stone, the freshman coming in, are going to play a piece in this D-line, so it's not going to be the most elite group in the country, but it seems to be coming along the way that they want to, and with the linebackers that they have behind them, they can make a couple of mistakes at that interior defensive line and still be more than fine on the back end. But the other news out of this one is Andrel Anthony. He got injured actually in the Texas game of last year and is still struggling with that injury. And frankly, Oklahoma has plenty of weapons to where this won't make too big of a difference, but this is a guy you want on the field. This is a guy that you can just get the ball to and he can make something happen with his legs, whether it's a screen or a drag, what have you. This is a guy that's really special with the ball in his hands, and you're going to need that guy on the field. It's definitely going to be one of those things to watch throughout the year where I think they have plenty of guys with Nick Anderson, with Deion Burks, and a number of others, but you're going to want as many options as you can going into the SEC, and this is one that definitely would be very valuable to this team if he was on the field. And then finally, the big thing out of Oklahoma camp is Zach Alley, the new defensive coordinator, is remarkable. And frankly, if you were following him at Jacksonville State, you probably knew that. But this is a guy that can really coach football, and he is very young at this very moment. So I would be surprised if he wasn't calling plays somewhere this time next year, frankly, because this guy is really remarkable. And this Oklahoma defense seems to be exactly where you want it to be, and is likely going to be the way that they win games in a lot of different ways. The turnover troubles for Jackson Arnold still seem to be very real, and if that's the case, then this defense is going to be asked to do a lot. It sounds like they have plenty of ability to answer that call, but definitely the way that they're going to win games is that 21-17 or that 24-20 type game that could be a little bit ugly, but maybe they get the job done at the end of the day. One of the games that they're looking forward to the most over at Oklahoma is that Auburn game, definitely a huge one, and the wide receiver room there is going to be really good. Whether it's Cam Coleman or Perry Thompson as freshmen that are going to make big plays, or Keandre Lambert-Smith is likely going to be the wide receiver one there. Sam Jackson the fifth is making big-time plays. Malcolm Simmons is making plays. You also have Robert Lewis, Caleb Burton. It's ridiculous, the amount of guys that they have at that position, especially when you think back to 2 years ago when it was a big-time question mark for this team, and it doesn't stop there. Peyton Thorne, it sounds like he is really making strides and doing things that you want him to do, and frankly, when you surround him with all those guys, that definitely does help that. So if he can take that step forward, if he can play a little bit closer to 2021 Peyton Thorne than 2023, then I think he's a very dangerous player, and this is a team that they're not going to win the SEC or anything, but they could easily win some games that you do not expect them to and ruin the fun for someone else. The other guy that's making noise is Rivaldo Fairweather. This is a guy that transferred over last year and made some plays here and there. Wasn't necessarily the huge part of the offense that I expect him to be this year, but definitely was a big-time player, and he is a guy that's just a straight-up mismatch. Wherever you want to put him, on a linebacker, on a safety, on a corner, he's going to be a problem. No doubt about it, and he's definitely someone that is going to have a huge part in this offense with all the wide receivers on the outside. Maybe it's just Rivaldo Fairweather over the middle of the field, just on a seam route that ruins a game for someone. So definitely a player to watch, and it sounds like the offense at least has all of the weapons that they definitely want on that team. And then the back end is still a little bit of a question. They brought in a ton of different transfers like Jaron Thompson, the safety from Texas, and the talent level is high. There's no doubt about that, but they still got to put it together. And it's the same worry I have about Oregon. It's the same worry I have about Ole Miss. It's the same worry I have about pretty much every team that transferred in a lot of guys at one particular position, especially the back end. Fitting them all together is not an easy thing to do, and it's definitely something that could hold back Auburn a little bit this year. Maybe they're playing a lot of shootouts, which would be a really weird thing to watch, but definitely something that is going to be huge for this team. And I think more than anyone, Jaron Thompson is going to be the guy that is going to have to step up and make some big plays on that back end if they don't want to be exposed pretty much every single week. Moving on to the quarterbacks that have been named as their starter, Malik Murphy, the Texas transfer, has been named the starter for the Duke Blue Devils. This is a huge thing for him. This is a guy that can stretch the field. There's no two ways about that. There are a million things that he can do, but more than anything else, he can sling the rock. He can throw about 60 or 70 yards down the field, and I think that's likely the pattern that you're going to see from Duke is kind of the pattern you saw from Alabama a year ago, where it's run the ball, and then we're going to go over top and try to beat you on one play. And I think that's something that they could have success in. It might not be the prettiest offense in the world or the most consistent, but they're going to be able to beat you on one play and totally change a game. So definitely something to watch, and obviously tough for Grayson Loftus, but it got to feel good if you're Duke, knowing that you have someone right there that has won some big games for you and is a solid player in your offense. So definitely something to watch, but Malik Murphy is going to be the starter, and frankly, I think he's going to have a pretty solid year this upcoming year. Over to USC, Miller Moss has been named the starter, and frankly, I don't know if it had to be named. He was battling Jaden Mayava technically, but overall, for a long time, everyone's felt like this is the guy. Pretty much since the Holiday Bowl a year ago, people felt like this was going to be the guy, and it makes for a really cool story in Week 1. It's Miller Moss against Garrett Nussmeier, two guys that waited their turn, two guys that watched, Heisman-level players play at their school and said, I'll just wait. I'll wait for my second, and then when I come, it's going to be incredible. And we'll see what happens in that Week 1 in Vegas, but it's going to be awesome. Two true gunslingers against two not-so-good defenses, and it's going to be a downright show. I can promise you that. So a couple of quarterbacks named. There are a couple more that I will update you on tomorrow. But at the end of the day, everything continues to roll out of fall camp, and we're winding down pretty soon. So they got to get some things in order. Still some big time questions around some of the biggest teams in the country. So definitely will be something to watch as we get into the next couple of days, as we get into the season especially. But that'll do it for the fourth segment here. Let's take our last break, and when we come back, I'm going to break down the 10 things that I love the most about college football. We have college football in 4 days, and I feel like it's a good time to break down what makes this sport so special to me, so I'll break that down right after this, so stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just broke down some of the different news out of fall camp. A couple of quarterbacks were named their starters, and there's a couple more that we'll break down tomorrow, but definitely some big time things coming out of that. But let's get into a Top 10 Tuesday, and I feel like it's a good time to break down what makes this sport so special. We have games in 4 days. We have week 1 in about 11. I had to do some quick math there. But once we get there, we're going to be reintroduced to all of this stuff once again, and I want to start breaking this stuff down. And my first one's a little bit interesting because there are some people that I don't necessarily love, but the people that cover this sport are special. Now, there are some that don't necessarily love the sport the same way that they should if they are covering it, but I won't get into names or anything like that. I do think there are some really remarkable people covering the sport. When you talk about that group right there, on College Game Day, there are some of the legends of this sport, but then you go down the list. I mean, you have the Cover 3 guys with Tom Fornelli and Bud Elliott and the number of other guys on that podcast that do an incredible job. Andy Staples is absolutely awesome. Josh Pate is one of my favorite guys in the entire industry. Brandon Walker, although is a little bit polarizing, I think is a ton of fun and someone that makes this sport special. So you talk about the sport, and there's so many reasons to love it. There's so many different ways to kind of, really identify with the sport. And when you get to see it on TV, when you get to see someone talk about it the same way that you feel about it, it's a special thing. So it's definitely something that I love, and a reason that I got into this was all of the people growing up that I looked up to and showing that, leading by example, I suppose. So definitely love that about this sport, but the fans are really special. There's no two ways about that. And this one is a little bit lower because, as we all know, there's about 5 or 10% of pretty much every fan base that is truly as frustrating as they possibly could be. But at the end of the day, there are some remarkable people, and just the idea of Nebraska being able to sell out every single game for the last some 40-odd years while not necessarily playing all that great football the last 20 is a remarkable thing. And it's a special thing that really only happens in sports in general, where you just have blind confidence, have blind loyalty to a team. It's a really cool thing, and it's always awesome to watch all those fans come together, and that's my number 8, the connection that you have with all these other fans. You see that sea of red right there. All of those people are best friends for 4 hours. A Martian could drop down into the middle of Neyland Stadium. As long as he gets out of that spaceship wearing the right shade of orange, he's going to be friends with 110,000 people for the next 4 hours, and they're going to be cheering on the Vols. Then, afterward, they might have some questions. But at the end of the day, it's going to be a remarkable thing. And when you're walking down the street in a random city, I went to the University of Georgia, so I'm walking down the street in a random city, and I'm wearing a Georgia shirt, and someone yells, "Go Dogs," to me, and I yell it back. That's a really cool thing, and something that really makes college sports, and college football especially, a little bit more special. The upsets, obviously. There's no doubt about it that the upsets are one of these special parts of this sport. And when you talk about App State walking into Kyle Field a year ago and getting a big-time win, even games like Tennessee over Bama in 2022, where they had lost 16 years in a row, they finally got on the winning side. And although it wasn't the crazy upset like App State over Texas A&M, it was still a big time moment for that program, and it was still an upset. So definitely one of those things where you have a number of ones throughout the history. App State is actually the poster child for upsets throughout college football history, but at the end of the day, it's one of the most special things in the sport. It's one of those things where you can walk in and those guys are bigger, faster, stronger, but on that Saturday, you play better football. So definitely a really special thing about the sport. And then moving on to number 6, the stories that, surround the sport are just absolutely awesome. Whether it's, a player, growing up a fan of the team and being able to be the starting quarterback like Stetson Bennett and lead them to 2 national titles. It's absolutely remarkable. It's one of those things that makes this sport incredible. Colt McCoy just retired. He grew up a Texas fan, got to lead them to a national title, didn't end up winning that national title, but was a remarkable player and one of the best players in the history of that university and that program. So those are special things, and that's part of the reason that college football is so awesome is you don't necessarily have to be the strongest or the fastest or the most that have the highest ability to make a number of different plays in this sport, and Stetson Bennett proved that pretty much better than anyone ever. So definitely a huge thing about the sport. And then the rivalries, and frankly, this could have gone all the way up to 1, but I think this is one that I think is so special. When you talk about, splitting the Red River 50-50 down the middle with Oklahoma and Texas fans, where it's a home game on one side and an away game on the other. Whether you talk about Auburn and Alabama getting together at the last game of the season, Ohio State, Michigan in the Big House. There's a million different ones across this sport, but this is part of what the sport makes the sport so special. The idea that you can hate a person for 4 hours because of the jersey that they're wearing and the color that they're wearing is a really, really cool thing, frankly. But moving on to number 4 here, the atmospheres are total difference makers. Period. End of story. When you talk about LSU at night, it is a game changer. It is everything that you want it to be, and it's one of those things that you can feel it through the television. You can be watching from thousands of miles away, and you still feel that energy. You still feel everything that some of those fans feel in that stadium, and that is a special, special thing about the sport, and it happens all across the country. It's not just, the LSUs, the Clemsons, the Georgias, the Bamas, the Ohio States. It's a lot of different universities where you want to go to Stillwater at night, it's going to be a nightmare for you. You want to go up to Utah and play a game, it is not going to be easy. Go up to BYU and play a game, it is not going to be easy. So there's so many different universities that have incredible atmospheres, and they're not one size fits all. Mississippi State down there just uses cowbells to make your life a nightmare for 4 hours. So there's so many different, variables that go into this thing, and it's always incredible hearing 100,000, 110,000, or even if it's just 60,000 yelling their heads off for 4 hours is a really, really cool thing about this sport. The traditions obviously are going to be up here. You talk about the midnight yell right there, which is a little bit weird, I'll give you that, but it's still very special to this sport. Ralphie running onto the field, the Sooner Schooner, there's so many different ones that define the sport in so many different ways, and it's special. It brings all the people together. It makes you identify with your team a little bit more, and especially for that midnight yell, it gets you out of bed a little bit later than you'd like to be, and definitely makes that Saturday probably a little bit harder, which is definitely something I'd like to ask an A&M fan that's been there. But overall, it's obviously what makes this sport special. Every single place around the country has their thing. They have the thing that they all know all the words to, like Rocky Top or whatever, that makes that place, that university, that program special, and it's always an incredible thing to watch these, even when they are a little bit weird, like the midnight yell. The players are number 2 for me, because I understand, they do incredible things on the field. They also do incredible things off the field. There are so many kids that have, remarkable upbringings, have overcome a number of different things, have done really good things while they've been in college, have, decided to stick it out at the university when the transfer portal is sitting right there. There's a million different stories of these kids, persevering, of these kids, putting what they want, which is to succeed on the college football field above all else, and it's a really, really cool thing to watch. And on top of that, you watch these kids graduate with honors. You watch these kids do a number of things in the classroom and outside the classroom that are just absolutely remarkable as well. it's always incredible. And anytime you can learn a little bit more about these players, it feels like you identify a little bit more with them. You know, you learn a little bit more about their family, about their upbringing, about their story, and it makes you feel a little bit closer to them, and that's always a really cool thing. So overall, you know, there's a million things to love about the sport. There's very few things that are quite as special as the kids that are on that field every Saturday. But the football is the number one thing, plain and simple. There's no question about this. The football is the special thing about this sport, where whether it's, you know, a quarterback hitting a wide receiver in stride on a deep play for 80-yard touchdown, whether it's a running back breaking through a hole and tearing a long run, the pop of the pads, the design, the tactics, the momentum, it's all incredible. Whether it's A.D. Mitchell going up and making a ridiculous play on a fade route, there are a million different things to love about this sport, and man, the designs of plays, the strategy, the tactics, everything in between is incredible. It's an absolute chess match out there, and it's about to become a little bit more of a chess match with the helmet communications coming into play, but it's awesome to watch. There's nothing more special. You know, you could take out all the traditions. You could take out the atmosphere. If they're playing that level of football, if they're playing that type of football every single Saturday, I'm probably locked in. Now, I want all the rest of that stuff, don't get me wrong, but the football is by far the most special thing to me, and it's a reason that this sport is so awesome. You know, there's so many different variables there, and there's so many different things that you have to consider as you go into this game, that the game itself is the most special thing about the sport by a pretty comfortable margin. And you'll find that throughout that entire thing, I didn't mention one thing that had anything to do with TV money, that had anything to do with NIL, that had anything to do with the transfer portal, because none of that stuff is what makes it special. All the stuff that makes it special is the very little intricate parts of the sport that maybe you don't see from the outside looking in. Maybe you don't really feel from the outside looking in, but the second you get into the sport, you can really feel it. And I think that's the thing that has really drawn me in the most throughout my life, really, is all the things that you don't necessarily see. All the things that you don't necessarily are able to pick out of a crowd, aren't tangible, is what makes this sport all the better. So we can worry about all of the politics. We can worry about all of the money moving around. We can worry about TV media deals, but that's not even remotely what makes this sport special. At least to me, maybe there's someone out there that really loves that ESPN media deal, and that's what they love about the sport, but I can't imagine that's the case. So definitely a huge thing, and when you talk about the sport, there are probably 100 different things I could go down before I get even remotely close to the idea of money. But that's a side point, definitely a rant I can do at some point throughout the next little bit, but that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference for us. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all of the social pages for all the content and updates you could possibly need. We have really incredible people doing awesome work across every single sport you could want. So anything in the world of sports, come on over to GSMC, and we have you totally covered. But thank you once again for listening, and I will see you guys tomorrow.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.